helps readers discover how parents, even well-intentioned ones, can leave our emotional tank empty, identify symptoms of emotional neglect and their impact on health, work, and relationships, repair the damage of emotional neglect, and learn life-changing self-care behaviors, be more emotionally supportive and connected in our own parenting, gain strategies for helping a patient or loved one overcome emotional neglect. People experience childhood emotional neglect to varying degrees, from a few subtle but important events to an entire childhood that is defined by it. This is the first book to give it a name and delve into the profound and often perplexing ways it influences our adult satisfaction and happiness. So that's what this book is about. Again, when I was first introduced to this book, I was like, I don't have any childhood trauma or neglect because even though I was raised by a single parent, my mom, I felt like she was good to me. I was lucky. I didn't feel like I had to suffer very much. Of course, my mom and I had our differences, and we sometimes fight and get mad at each other, but I think that's normal, right? So I felt like I had a fairly normal childhood. But then, as I sort of delved into the details of my childhood, I realized that being raised by a single mom, in a way, is trauma in itself, because essentially it means you have to be understanding of situations that you may not be emotionally ready to experience, like understanding financial situations, understanding that you have to do it all, because my mom actually taught me. She was a career woman, very, very driven, and in a way, I kind of took after her. She taught me at a young age that you only have yourself to rely on. So then when it became clear to me that perhaps I do have trauma from my childhood in a subtle way, I realized it's because it's shaped me to be who I am, because today in my work life I've had to overcome the feelings of I have to do it all. Sometimes I have a hard time delegating tasks to my peers or the people I work with, because I feel like I have to do it all. So that's basically what happened to me as a child. If I look back, is because my mom taught me you only have yourself to rely on, and that's a good sentiment, but I do think sometimes you want to be able to rely on others as well. So this book kind of opened my eyes to different things. So I want to take a moment to read it to you, just a few portions, to see if you're interested in maybe picking up a copy yourself and reading it for yourself. So if you're interested, please keep on reading and watching. Alright, this book has, I believe, 9 chapters. So what I'll do is I'm gonna start with part of chapter 1, kind of tell you what chapter 1 is about, and read you part of chapter 2. Again, I think the goal is not for me to tell you what everything there is in this book, but just to give you an idea, if you want to apply some of the principles or buy this book and read it for yourself, I think both are really good ideas. So, chapter 1 is about why wasn't my tank filled? So they're talking about your emotional tank. So this one says, if you're a parent as well as a reader, you may find yourself identifying with the parental failures presented in this book, as well as with the emotional experience of the child. Therefore, I ask that you pay close attention to the following warnings. So then there are two different warnings. The first warning is, all good parents are guilty of emotionally failing their children at times. Nobody is perfect. We all get tired, cranky, stressed, distracted, bored, confused, disconnected, overwhelmed, or otherwise compromised here and there. This does not qualify us as emotionally neglectful parents. Emotionally neglectful parents distinguish themselves in one of two ways, and often both. It's either one, they're emotionally, or they emotionally fail their child in some critical way in a moment of crisis, causing the child a wound which may never be repaired, or they're chronically tone deaf to some aspect of a child's need throughout his or her childhood development. Every single parent on earth can recall a parenting failure that makes him cringe, where he knows that he has failed his child. But the harm comes from the totality of important moments in which emotionally neglectful parents are deaf and blind to the emotional needs of their growing child. So this is the first warning. The second warning talks about, if you were indeed emotionally neglected and are a parent yourself as well, there's a good chance that as you read this book, you will start to see some ways in which you have passed the torch of emotional neglect to your child. If so, it's extremely vital for you to realize that it is not your fault, because it's invisible, insidious, and easily passes from generation to generation. It's extremely unlikely and difficult to stop unless you become explicitly aware of it. Since you're reading this book, you're light years ahead of your parents. You have the opportunity to change the pattern, and you're taking it. The effects of emotional neglect can be reversed, and you're about to learn how to reverse these parental patterns for yourself and for your children. No self-blame allowed. it goes on to give some examples. And then in chapter 2, they talk about 12 ways to end up empty. So I'll read you this part. There are an infinite number of ways for a parent to fail a child emotionally. There are so many that it would be impossible to cover them all in this book. What we can do is take a look at the most pertinent categories of parents. Please read this with an understanding that your particular parents may have traits from one type combined with traits from another. Even if you think you have parents pegged after reading the first type, it may be helpful to read all the way to the end of the chapter. It's entirely possible you'll see something from type 9 that you've experienced yourself after having already identified your parents as type 5. All of these examples are meant to be mix and match, although the majority of the parents fit predominantly into one identifiable type. So here I'm going to go over the types. So type number 1 is the narcissistic parent. Perhaps you're familiar with the Greek myth of Narcissus, which is where the word narcissistic is derived from. In the myth, Narcissus was a strikingly handsome young man whose looks dazzled all who knew him. Many praised him and fell in love with him, but he was so vain that he rejected them all. No one was good enough for him. Eventually, Narcissus saw and fell in love with his reflection in the pool of water. Unable to walk away from his own image, he either committed suicide or wasted away, depending on the version of this myth. So narcissistic people are a lot like their namesake. Most of the time, they run on a full tank of superiority, confidence, and charisma. But sometimes narcissists recognize that their sense of superiority to others is an illusion. Therefore, they gravitate towards evidence that confirms that sense of superiority, and they avoid interactions or relationships that provide evidence to the contrary. When someone or something shatters their grandiose sense of themselves, they become difficult. Despite their arrogance, they're easily hurt and emotionally weak. They hold grudges, blame failures on others, banish people to the doghouse, and tantrum when things don't go their way. They don't like to be wrong. They like to hear themselves talk. Perhaps their most damaging trait is that they often judge others and find them sadly lacking. They are the kings and queens of any family, office, or enterprise. You can imagine that when narcissists become parents, they demand perfection from their children, or at the very least, no embarrassment. While healthy parents may cringe a little when their child fails to catch the fly ball in the big game, the narcissist parent of that child is angry and feels personally humiliated when their children make mistakes that are visible to others, no matter how much they need their parents' help at the time. narcissists take it personally and make their children pay. Narcissistic parents don't really recognize their children as people. Instead, they see their children as little extensions of themselves. The needs of their child are defined by the needs of the parents, and the child who tries to express his needs is often accused of being selfish or inconsiderate. And they give some more examples. When narcissists become parents, they're able to have very different relationships with each of their children. They play favorites and often find at least one of their children a disappointment. But that one child who reflects them well by being handsome or pretty or athletic or intelligent is the anointed one and enjoys a special relationship with the narcissist mommy or daddy. It is sometimes only in adulthood that the favorite child of a narcissist realizes that her parents' love has been conditional all along. I'm sure you're starting to get the idea. Emotionally neglectful parents can look a lot like healthy parents at first glance, but the differences are dramatic, just as in the forest one. Mushroom can be dinner and the other can be deadly. The similarities are on the surface alone. Type 2. The authoritarian parent. In 1966, the psychologist Dr. Diana Baumrind was the first one to identify and describe the authoritarian parent. She described authoritarian parents as rule-bound, restrictive, and punitive, raising their children based upon very inflexible and unbending demands. The phrases most likely come to mind when considering authoritarian parents are old school, children are meant to be seen and not heard, spare the rod to spoil the child. If you're a baby boomer, you have a better chance of having raised by authoritarian parents. This parenting style was more popular among parents of that era. Today's parents tend to adopt a much more open and permissive approach, often fueled by a conscious decision not to raise their own children as they themselves were raised. However, there are certainly plenty of authoritarian parents still in existence. Authoritarian parents require a lot from their children. The children are expected to follow their parents' rules without questioning them. At the same time, these parents don't explain the reasons behind their rules. They simply require adherence and crack down harshly when the child does not comply. These parents are more likely to punish or spank rather than they are to discuss a problem or issue with their child. They are not particularly concerned with the feelings or ideas of the child. They parent according to a template they have in their own head of what a generic child's behavior should be, and do not take into account the individual needs, temperament, or feelings of their child. Most abusive parents fall into the authoritarian category. However, not all emotionally neglectful. So they give more examples of type 2. For type 3, the permissive parents. The permissive parent could be considered the polar opposite of the authoritarian in many ways. The permissive parent's model is don't worry, be happy. In our culture, these types of parents are portrayed as beloved and quirky. The permissive parent could be described as taking the path of least resistance. At best, they just want their children to be happy. At worst, they simply don't want to have to do the work of parenting. Either way, they do not provide their children with limits, structure, or in adolescence a strong adult presence against which a child can rebel. Saying no takes energy. Forcing one's child to do a chore or a task takes energy. Dealing with an angry child takes energy. Being momentarily hated by your child for saying no is painful. The permissive parent finds it easier to do the chores himself than to make the child do it, and to look the other way or make excuses for the child when he gets into trouble. Permissive parents are often seen as very loving by their children. This is because permissive parents stir up very little conflict with their children. They simply don't say no often enough. Many of these parents have great discomfort with conflict in general and have their own struggles with self-discipline. Type 4. The bereaved parent, divorced or widowed. The bereaved parents are often just desperately trying to cope. It's not easy to have a parent who is grieving. It is even harder when they are grieving your other parent whom you lost to. Children who lose a parent through divorce or death have their own grieving to do. Grief in a family can be very complicated and difficult. And then we have type 5, which is the addicted parent. When we hear the word addict, most of us think alcoholic or drug addict, but addictions encompasses a much broader range of compulsive behaviors, from gambling, shopping, to scratch tickets, cigarettes, slot machines, online gambling, to name a few. Some of these activities pursued in moderation are pleasant and stress relieving, but these pursuits can cross the line into addiction when a person begins to feel intense pleasure bordering on relief when doing the activity or anticipating doing it. Spend more and more time on the activity so that family members notice and complain. Spend money and other resources on the activity whether or not one can afford it. Use the activity for many purposes to relieve stress, socialize, manage emotions, or entertain others. And denying that activity is harming oneself or anyone else. Most recently, neuroscientist David Linden wrote about the range of pleasures that our brains may become addicted to. He urges the reader to view addicts compassionately, the way you would any other ill person. But what makes that difficult for family members is the harm that the addict invariably causes the people closest to him. And addicted parents are not all the same. At one end of the spectrum, there is a father or mother who is lost to drugs or alcohol and experiences obvious consequences. Children of these dysfunctional addicts' parents are not only emotionally neglected, but traumatized. This is not the type of parent we're discussing here. We're interested in the functional, loving parents whose addiction may not even be identified as a problem in the family. These are the parents about whom my client say some variation of, he had his beers every night, but it wasn't a problem. These are parents who are forgiven for the wine every night, even if they get irritable or mushy, because they are there for their children in many ways. Functional addicted parents are capable of being good parents. They are there at the football game with a cooler and the snacks for the team. They invite over your cousins and aunts and uncles to have barbecue. When you get in trouble at school, they can march into the principal's office and stick up for you. They can make you laugh. So what can a loving soccer mom who likes her wine possibly have done or not done to wind up in this book? Or a hardworking father who likes to bet on every sport on television? Are they guilty of emotionally neglectful parenting? Simply put, what harms children of functional addicted parents is this. They're behaving like two different people, and the child cannot always predict which side of her addicted parent is going to show up. When caught up in their addictive behavior, they forget to parent. They're temporarily asleep on the job and can be mean, frightening, immature, selfish, or inappropriate. When not caught up in the behavior, the same parent can be kind, supportive, wise, helpful, fun, or reassuring. So for the child of a functionally addicted parent, memories of family life are invariably mixed with positive memories, interspersed with sad ones. After a childhood full of unpredictable parenting, the adult child of the addict is anxious, worried, and secretly insecure. Wow. Children of addicted parents experience the lack of predictability as highly anxiety-provoking. As adults, they're therefore at significantly higher risk to have anxiety disorders and to become addicts themselves than are people who were raised by non-addicted parents. Being a good parent most of the time and a horrible parent once in a while creates insecure, anxious adults who are just waiting for things to go wrong. What do we think so far? Should I keep going? How about type 7, the workaholic parent? the workaholic quite well in the character of super ambitious businessman Jack Donahue. In one funny scene, lying in the hospital bed after barely surviving a work stress-induced heart attack, he says with great feeling, "Being so close to death has shown me that I have lived my life all wrong." When Tina Fey's character leans in close to better hear the wisdom he's about to impart, he whispers weakly, "I should have worked longer hours and put more into my jobs." In our capitalist economy, we value hard work and high salaries. Of all the addictions mentioned above, work is the only one that actually brings money into the household. Workaholics are often driven, successful people who are admired and looked up to by coworkers, family, and community. Unfortunately, it's their children who often suffer in silence. Workaholic parents work long hours, are obsessed with their jobs, and tend to pay inadequate attention to the needs and feelings of their children. To make matters worse, children of workaholics garner little sympathy from others, as they often have successful parents, plenty of money, and nice things. By putting their work first, workaholics convey the message to their children that their feelings and needs are of lesser importance. So that's interesting. And now I'm gonna go over number 8, and that'll be the last one I'll read today. If you like what I've done so far today, please let me know in the comment section down below, and I will do a part 2 of this. Type 8, the parent with a special needs family member. There's no category of parent who deserves to be in this book about emotionally neglect less than the parent in a household where someone is ill or severely impaired. Yet here they are, though no fault of their own, because life has delivered a challenge which is often unmanageable. And listen in on the conversation that parents Tom and Patty are having with their daughter Miranda, age 13, and the youngest of 3 children. "You're such a big help to us, Miranda," says her dad, Tom. "You sure are," adds Patty. "I know it's been especially hard lately with Patrick back at Children's Hospital, having his shunt put in. Your brother, Stephen, does nothing but complain. But you're my rock." And here is what it sounds like in the Smith household, where 10-year-old Jack's older brother suffers from behavioral and emotional problems associated with autism. When a child grows up with a serious illness in the family, whether it's that of a parent or of a sibling, the caregiving that would normally go towards the child is compromised. Often the caregiver parent is stretched thin herself and calls upon the well child implicitly or explicitly to selflessly help out. Life in a household with an ill child or parent is often in crisis mode. For example, while a parent makes frequent trips to the hospital, the emotionally neglected child eats a frozen dinner and eats alone in front of a TV. Or the child finds himself gets used to his parents being irritated by him for little reason. Parents of ill households usually recognize that there is an impact on the healthy child. They may check in with him, attempt to discuss how he's doing, and offer what support they can. They're conscious of the amount of time spent on the ill family members, even worry about it. So these parents seem like the last parent who would emotionally neglect their healthy children. But multiple studies have shown the perceptions of both the parents and the healthy child in a household where someone's ill is that parents and the healthy child are asked to rate how the healthy child is doing. Results consistently show that parents see their healthy child as doing okay, while the same child perceives him or herself in a much more negative light. Conclusions. When parents are or feel powerless to change the bad things in their children's lives, they tend to minimize the effects of these bad things. Not only do such parents subconsciously minimize their child's distress, they also inadvertently burden him with majority of which he is not really capable. So yeah, there you have it. Those are the first 8 types of parents who emotionally neglect their children. So which one do you think yours fits in? Do you recall having lived through one of these experiences?